Hello. Welcome back to the Space School. Today we're going to be doing What If Anakin Was Trained from Birth. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else part of my team. Want a chance to win in our next giveaway? Watch the end of the video and I'll tell you exactly how you can win. Our story begins in 41 BBY with the creation of a child born of the Force. Anakin Skywalker was born in the Outer Rim world planet of Tatooine, and it would send ripples through the Force. While the Jedi had seemingly lost their way, they too would pick up on it. The two Sith in the galaxy were also very aware of this creation. They felt it through the Force, though less so than the Jedi. The Force created Anakin Skywalker as a result of the Sith playing around with the Force. He was born to be the Chosen One, the singular being that could bring balance to the Force, and yet both sides of the Force were alerted to his presence. One Jedi Master in the High Council would inform the Jedi Council that he would be traveling to the planet of Tatooine to find this child and bring him back to the temple. Master Sifo-Dyas was less controlled by the Council and their code, and he could feel where Skywalker was. Master Sifo-Dyas would be dispatched along with Masters Ki-Adi-Mundi and Saesee Tiin to see if they could locate the child of the Force. The three Jedi would take their travels to the Outer Rim, being that the ripple of the Force came from there. The Sith would also be in the Outer Rim searching for the child as well. Both Sidious and Plagueis split up so that they could find the location and discover the creation faster. The two of them, after all, were the reason that Anakin was created to begin with. They messed with the Force, and the Force created Skywalker as a result. The three Jedi would use the Force as their ally to help them locate the child. They didn't know where he was, but as they concentrated on what they really wanted to find, it led them to the planet of Tatooine. The three Jedi believed that it was a mistake, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it would be the sense of an urge in the Force just to decide to be on Tatooine. It was the most unexpected place in the galaxy. It would deter evil from discovering whatever it may be. When the three Jedi arrived on Tatooine, they made their way to one of the largest cities on the planet, Mos Espa. The three Jedi saw what a disgrace the Outer Rim was left in, and realized that as their mandate as Jedi had been a failure. Sifo-Dyas at the very least saw the Outer Rim as a failure of the Jedi. Saesee Tiin did in his own way, and well, Ki-Adi-Mundi was the bringer of chaos himself. The Jedi walked through the streets noticing all the different species and how well noticeably they were different on Tatooine. While most people across the galaxy would recognize a Jedi if they saw one, the people here weren't all that fazed by the Jedi. They kind of ignored them. For the Jedi, it was kind of weird, but they kept walking around looking for any sign of this essence on the Force. They kept walking and Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi stopped in his tracks, turning around and igniting his lightsaber. He looked around quietly without saying a word. The other two Jedi instinctually ignited their own weapons, doing the same, looking around without saying a word. Sifo-Dyas spoke up, asking what it was, but Mundi still didn't say a word. Saesee Tiin looked into the crowd and then back to Sifo-Dyas. The three Jedi dispersed the crowd. Everyone was looking at them with confusion, and then Ki-Adi-Mundi pointed his lightsaber forward. Mundi ran forward and Saesee Tiin followed. Sifo-Dyas was about to do the same, but then he decided not to. He turned around and looked into the crowd. On the other hand, Masters Mundi and Tiin chased down a caped figure in the streets. For whatever reason, Mundi was interested in who this could be. He leapt over a group of people before instantly regretting his decision. The figure turned around and shot lightning towards him. Mundi lifted his blade and deflected it, but he was alright, holding his lightsaber up and staying safe. He landed heavily on the ground, losing balance as a crimson lightsaber ignited and swung for him. Saesee Tiin came around the crowd, igniting his emerald blade and swinging forward. The Sith Lord used the Force to push Saesee's blade into the sand before parrying Ki-Adi-Mundi. On the other side of a city street, Sifo-Dyas could hear the lightsabers clashing, but he kept on his path. He could feel it. It was so close. Turning the corner and walking into an alleyway, he found a slave woman with a small infant in her arms. She looked to be sleeping, with a thick blanket wrapped around her child. Sifo-Dyas took a deep breath. He felt the choice fall into his lap, and yet he was stuck on his thoughts. He didn't know what to choose. He knelt down. He couldn't tell if the woman was alive, so he reached out with the Force, and she was gone. Sifo-Dyas then reached down to the child. He was barely breathing. Sifo-Dyas took the child and picked him up. Sifo-Dyas looked over and noticed that Shmi had been beaten, and she was killed protecting her child. Sifo-Dyas felt the head of the infant, and it was chilled. Even in the desert sun, it was concerning. Sifo-Dyas took the child and ran forward. The lightsabers were still cracking away at each other. He looked over and saw Mundi and Saesee Tiin interlocked in a tense standoff. Dyas couldn't figure out who they were fighting, but the crimson blade he saw. so he turned and made his way back to the shuttle that they arrived in. The two Jedi noticed their colleague running away from them, so they fended off the Sith, pushing and then pulling away before running away. The Sith Lord sheathed his lightsaber and darted into an alleyway. Sifo Dyas got back to the vessel and turned on the engines, before lifting off with the bay door open. He pulled the vessel around towards the city as the other two Jedi Masters noticed it and jumped up into the bay. Mundi called out to Sifo Dyas, letting him know that they were both on the ship, and as Sifo Dyas started to pull away, the ship locked up. Saesee Tiin looked down and saw the dark figure with his hand up in the air, using the Force to stop the ship from escaping. Saesee took his lightsaber and whipped it at the Sith Lord, who was holding their ship. The Sith Lord ignited his lightsaber, and concentration was broken on the ship long enough for Sifo Dyas to pull the Jedi vessel away from the planet, as Saesee Tiin pulled his lightsaber back to his hands with the Force. Sifo Dyas called out, telling them that they needed to make sure the kid was alright, and double-check his midichlorian count. Sifo Dyas was able to check it briefly, but he wasn't able to fully check it because he wasn't sure if the kid would survive. When the two Jedi Masters got around to the infant, they realized he was almost dead, and they immediately got to the medical kit and started working on filling him up with appropriate nutrients. Once the ship was in hyperspace, Sifo Dyas rushed back into the main area of the vessel and asked if the child was alright. Mundi looked over and shook his head. He told Sifo Dyas that it would be a miracle if he made it to the Jedi Temple alive. Saesee Tiin leaned down and continued trying to make sure the boy was alright. Mundi then turned to Sifo Dyas and told him about the foe they faced. While initially Ki-Adi-Mundi was the type of Jedi to be skeptical of the Sith's return, he barely survived an encounter with the first Sith seen in millennia. Sifo Dyas asked if he had any idea of who or where the Sith came from. Mundi just said the Sith Lord was a Mun, and he was extremely skilled with the Force and with the lightsaber. Mundi suggested that if there was another Sith, the one he and Tin encountered was likely the Sith Lord, the Sith Master if you will. Sifo Dyas understood the severity of this, telling them that once they got the child back to the medical bay inside the temple, they could inform the council. To both Tin's and Mundi's surprise, Sifo Dyas seemed more optimistic than they were about the survival of this child. The trip through hyperspace would be extremely stressful, though once they arrived at the temple, their stress would calm down. The child was still alive by some chance in the Force. When the ship landed, Ki-Adi-Mundi took Skywalker in his arms, and the moment the ship entered the hangar bay, he jumped off the ramp and ran down the corridors. Saesee Tiin followed closely behind. The moment Sifo Dyas was able to land the ship, he bolted from the ship and ran through the hangar bay, and saw the other two Jedi running down the hall. The three Jedi made their way to the medical bay within the temple, and rushed the infant to a capsule made for infants. Mundi directed the droids to preserve the child's life. The medical droids immediately got to work, and the Jedi waited patiently for the child to be taken care of. Ki-Adi-Mundi told Master Sifo Dyas to inform the council of their discoveries. He would stay here with the boy and keep watch over him. Sifo Dyas bowed and left the room with Master Saesee Tiin behind him. The two would make their way to the council chambers, and from there they would express to them everything they'd been through. First, Saesee Tiin would talk about Ki-Adi-Mundi sensing the presence of the Sith before the two of them got engaged, which led them to believe that it was a master of the Sith. Saesee continued, saying that the Sith Lord was a master of the Force and used his skills with a lightsaber extremely well, though Saesee Tiin believed the Sith was there for the same purpose they were. Sifo Dyas then spoke up, telling the council about the child they discovered. He told them that the child's mother was beaten to death, and it seemed as if the child wasn't much older than a couple of days. Sifo Dyas believed that the child was the Chosen One. He had a midichlorian count higher than any known being the Jedi Order had ever seen. Sifo Dyas continued saying that if the child survived his early life disadvantages, the chances are that he was the Chosen One. The council members looked around in a quiet murmur. They asked Sifo Dyas where the child was. He spoke up, telling them that currently he was inside the medical bay with Master Mundi, being treated. The council all collectively moved to their feet without having to say a word. They looked at Sifo Dyas and then suggested that he lead them to the medical bay that Skywalker was in. When the council eventually got down to the medical bay, everything was rather still. The droids were working on their job, but Master Mundi was on his knees, meditating in the Force, hoping that the child would survive, but trusting that the Force would provide the child a way to survive his ordeal. The council could feel the Force emanating from the child the moment they walked in, and in unison they joined Ki-Adi-Mundi in meditation. It would take several hours, but Anakin would prevail through the near-death experience. Because of this survival, the council would go back to ordinary business, and so they returned to the Jedi Council to talk about all the new developments. Of course, the training of the Chosen One and the new rise of the Sith, but there was also something else that was plaguing the minds of Ki-Adi-Mundi, Saesee Tiin, and Sifo Dyas. which was the obvious disarray that the Outer Rim was in. The Jedi Council had a lot to confront, and so the Master of the Order, Mace Windu, expressed that the Council should reach out to the Senate and inform them that the Outer Rim was in disorder, and the Peace Corps should be sent out there with Jedi Knights to solve some of these issues that the Republic had been neglecting. The other issue was the presence of the Sith. The Jedi were now alerted to their presence, meaning that a simple Master and Padawan duo wouldn't be permitted to travel off of Coruscant alone. Every Jedi needed to have a duo of Masters or Knights, meaning that if a Jedi Master and apprentice went out, they'd have to be accompanied by another Jedi Master and or apprentice duo. The message was sent out immediately. It wouldn't take long for Jedi to send Council members Windu and Balaba to the Senate building to inform the Chancellor about the issues in the Outer Rim and how the Republic was ignoring its citizens. While the Chancellor hadn't been acting on fixing these issues, having the Jedi come forward was actually a bit motivating, especially since they were offering to lead the trip to the Outer Rim with the Peace Corps and do the work for the rather unmotivated Republic. The Jedi Council also talked about what they would do with the Chosen One. Sifo-Dyas suggested that each Master spend time with the child during his developmental time. Instead of just putting him with the rest of his classes, they should individually focus on him and identify what traits he succeeded with the most. If Skywalker had a particular trait of a particular Jedi Master, then that Master or Masters, if it was more than one, could become Skywalker's teacher. In all actuality, Master Sifo-Dyas really wanted to train Skywalker, because he was the one that saved him from death. He felt a connection to the boy, and it was almost paternal. As a Jedi, he couldn't really explain the feeling he had for him, but it was an overwhelming connection, though Sifo-Dyas knew he couldn't allow his personal feelings to get in the way of what he wanted. From here on out, the Jedi would begin working with the Republic Peace Corps on worlds across the Outer Rim, helping people out of obscurity. One of the Jedi that would be on the front lines with the Peace Corps would be Jedi Master Dooku. He believed that this was the best decision the Jedi Council made since the time of the High Republic. Dooku was quick to jump on the mission, and he would work closely with the Peace Corps. Inside the temple, Anakin would make a full recovery, and after a couple of years, he'd finally begin his training as a Jedi. He would be taught all the basics through all the basic classes, and all of them would be taught to him by council members. Anakin's first memories would revolve around the Jedi Council, because that's all he saw. Off the bat, the first council members he spent most of his time with were Yaddle, Yoda, and Tera Sinube. At the point, Tera Sinube was a Jedi Council member. Sifo-Dyas would also spend time with Anakin, but typically the eldest members of the Council would spend time with someone of such importance. The Council would have put Plo Koon with Skywalker, but they believed that he'd be a better fit for Skywalker once he was a little older. Anakin would learn a lot with his teachers, though one thing that would cause him some confusion would be Yoda's speaking patterns. It wasn't that Yoda was hard to understand, rather it was confusing trying to learn Galactic Common while one of your instructors spoke it backwards. Other than Grandmaster Yoda's speech pattern, Anakin developed really naturally as a Jedi. He was devoid from attachments, and he was true to the code that he was instructed to follow. Anakin spent a lot of time with Tera Sinube though. He was Anakin's favorite early day instructor. While Yaddle had an overwhelmingly sense of calmness to her, Anakin got along with Tera Sinube the most. He was an elder Jedi like Yaddle and Yoda, but his way of explaining things always made sense to Anakin. Because Anakin had no memories of his mother's death, he wasn't at all inhibited by the tragedy of his early life. Instead, he flourished on his own. Anakin would have interaction with people his own age as well. This had him in a class twice a week with Barriss Offee. She was just a few months younger than Anakin, and the two of them got along really well. But Anakin's peers never really understood why he wasn't with them all the time. This didn't mean they discriminated against each other, rather it just meant that they didn't understand why he wasn't with them. Anakin didn't mind. He also didn't see himself as better than anyone. He was very humbled. Also, because of the Jedi's fear of the Sith capturing Skywalker, they kept him inside the Jedi Temple until he was old enough to leave. They wanted to make sure that he was acclimated to their culture and their way of life. But he was. Anakin donned really pure robes that were relatively light but not pure white. As a young boy, he grew out blonde hair, but when he grew up later in time, his hair would turn to a darker color. Skywalker enjoyed each of his teachers he had, and he often got to visit the council chambers, something that was extremely uncommon for a Jedi to do, especially a Jedi youngling. Once Anakin reached an age of 5, he would begin to have training with every other council member on the council. This would have him with Plo Koon, Saesee Tiin, Depa Billaba, Even Peel, Oppo Rensis, Eero Puth, Mace Windu, and the rest of the council members, who in their each own respect were eager to train and spend time with Anakin. Already he showed signs of progressive growth. He was exceeding all of his age requirements, and even those from years beyond him. Anakin, because of his midichlorian count, was incredibly smart. His brain developed a little bit faster, which meant he soared through basic instruction, something he quite enjoyed. Because Anakin didn't grow up on Tatooine, surrounded by thrills and excitement, he was perfectly content with spending time inside the Jedi archives with Jocasta Nu, and learning the ways of the Force, and even more, just simply reading. Across the galaxy, the Republic began to crack down on slavery, and they began to slap the rise of crime, and they started to tear down the criminal empires that existed out in the Outer Rim. Dooku became renowned across the Outer Rim for his work to help people, and they saw him as an aid from the Jedi. A newfound respect for the Jedi would be found across the galaxy. Dooku finally seeing what the Jedi could do with their message and what they preached would lead him to be less inclined to take an offer that came to him from a senator from Naboo. Though something about this senator from Naboo seemed off to Dooku, but because of his suspicions, he would keep up a ruse with the senator, with the idea that there could be something deeper emanating from this man. Regardless, the Jedi were doing great. Skywalker was continuously excelling through his workload, and as he reached the age of 9, the Sith would be revealed again. Though this time, when Qui-Gon Jinn came to the Jedi Council revealing the truth of the Sith, he'd be taken completely seriously. Because the Jedi trusted Master Jinn, they would send the Master of the Order, Mace Windu, to Naboo with Master Plo Koon to ensure that whichever Sith was following the Jedi around was dealt with. The Council wouldn't really keep Anakin involved in this. They didn't want to baby him, but he was well aware of the Sith. They just didn't want him to worry about Windu or Plo, because he was close with both of them. Anakin, though, he knew, wasn't really upset that they didn't tell him. Anakin operated on a higher level of reality than the rest of the Jedi that surrounded him. His connection with the Force and his teachings allowed him to know much more than those around him taught him. Anakin, unlike the rest of the children, would spend his times inside the garden at the Jedi Temple meditating. When he wasn't scheduled for training of any sorts, he just kept to himself. Skywalker had no real reason to be anywhere else. But because of his loyalty to the Force and his focus on his connection to the Force surrounded him and emboldened him. On Naboo, Windu and Plo Koon would follow the Queen to her hangar bay, and before they knew it, they encountered the Sith assassin, Darth Maul. While he certainly didn't fit the description of the Sith that Mundi and Tin faced on Tatooine 9 years before, he was still a Sith. Maul was ready for this fight until he saw the Jedi he was facing. He knew he could take on Jinn and Kenobi, assuming that the Jedi would be all the unwise to challenge him with those two Jedi. But no, they sent two of the best duelists inside the entire order. Though Maul accepted his challenge and prepared to fight the two of them, by running towards him using his age to his advantage. Both Plo and Mace were much older. Not ancient like Yoda, but they had years on their belt that Maul didn't. Though this actually worked really well in their favor, considering for Jedi like Mace and Plo, age meant they got a whole lot better at doing what they did, which was beat whoever challenged them without blinking. Plo and Windu used their patience and allowed Maul to take a typical aggressive Sith approach. Their movements reciprocated everything Maul did with a strong parry and block. Another thing about these two Jedi is Mace used Vapad, which allowed him to use his opponent's dark side energy against them, and while Plo was basically just a physical dominant Jedi. While Maul was a Zabrak and naturally more physically strong than a human being, Plo Koon was a Khel Dor, whom naturally had a lot more physical strength than most species that wielded a lightsaber, most that weren't Wookiees at least. Plo parried a strike by Maul before leveraging more power towards him and throwing him off balance. Maul was tossed into fighting Windu. It wasn't exactly a positive start for him, as he smashed his blades against the Master of the Order, who pressed forward heavily. Maul used his physical attributes to flip around and strike where he could. The two Jedi had to hand it to Maul. He was impressive with his strength, and he was impressive with his ability to try and hold them off, but the truth is, they were still going to beat him. Maul leapt forward and Mace caught him with his lightsaber and struck forward with two hard swift strikes. Maul tumbled back and turned to see Plo bearing down on him, blasting his lightsaber with a heavy strike that would throw the Sith assassin from his feet. Maul realized something in this moment. It was a setup. While Maul knew about Plagueis and even about Dooku, he began to think that Palpatine was going to replace him. While Maul didn't know much, he did know that Plagueis was killed right after Palpatine became Chancellor. While the extremities of the Trade Federation blockading Naboo weren't as harsh as they could have been, they were enough to get the Chancellor Valorum removed from office. Maul assumed that Dooku was meant to be his replacement because Maul overheard a transmission between Dooku and Sidious one night. Though he wasn't able to hear much of it, it seemed as if Sidious was making headway with Dooku instead. Seeing that there were two Jedi Masters standing before him, Maul decided he wouldn't die for another Sith Lord's world, because he wanted his own vision, and so he leapt backwards and used the Force to throw an array of crates at the Jedi, and while they were distracted, he took a container full of fuel and launched it at the door panel, and it exploded, slamming the blast door shut that he originally showed himself through. Windu and Plo looked up, and then back at each other. Windu ran forwards towards the door, and Plo spoke up, telling Windu that the Sith assassin was on his own journey. Their mission here was done. They needed to assist the Queen of Naboo and allow the Force to make his own decisions. May stopped in his tracks and looked at Plo and nodded his head. He realized that Plo was right. They needed to focus on taking back the throne room and arresting those who decided to blockade the planet of Naboo. The entire invasion of Naboo would come to an end with a Jedi victory. The Queen would return to control of her planet, and the people of Naboo and the Gungans would come together. When Windu and Plo returned to the Jedi Temple, they informed the Council of what they encountered on Naboo. Though shortly after they informed the Council of their discoveries, Jedi Master Dooku would come back and inform the Council they had a lead on the Sith Master. Sifo Dyas was playing a part for him and faked his own death, to allow Dooku to expose Sidious as the Sith Lord. Dooku told the Jedi Council that the Sith Lord was Chancellor Palpatine. He planned on building a clone army, and Master Sifo Dyas' death was faked so that he could expose himself. When the Council learned this information, they were confused as to why Dooku never told them of their plan. Dooku admitted that he stumbled into it by happenstance, because he was vocal about wanting the Jedi to do more in the Republic. Palpatine approached him and talked to him about their ideals, but something felt off. Dooku then went on to say that he stayed with it because it was possible that Palpatine could be the Sith. When he felt like he was getting close to figuring it out, Dooku brought his good friend Sifo Dyas into it, because he knew he would accomplish the goal. Dooku admitted that he would have told him, but he didn't want to give up his plan. Regardless, the Council thanked him for his service and saw the value he gave them. Dooku went into great detail about Palpatine's plan, and while it had already started, the clones weren't being created. Jango Fett was essentially just paid off to be an actor, and the Trade Federation was really out of his control. So the Jedi did what they needed to do. They marched into the industrial sector and they killed Sidious. The legacy of the Sith that ran through him was extinguished, and now only one Sith remained. That was Darth Maul. While it was a tragedy that Maul escaped Naboo, Plo Koon believed that it was by the will of the Force that he would escape. The Council had important business to tend to. Part of it was training of the Chosen One, and the other part of it was explaining to the Senate that their newly elected Chancellor was working against the Republic. While Dooku would have wanted to stop the invasion of Naboo, he couldn't interfere, because he didn't actually know it was going to happen. He was left in the dark about it. Palpatine only explained that change would be coming to the galaxy very soon, and that change happened to be the invasion of Naboo. Regardless, everything would be dealt with accordingly, and the Jedi would return back to their focuses. The Senate worked back into voting in a new Chancellor, and even reducing the role that the Chancellor had in the Republic. Now that Anakin was 9, the Council was ready to blow past the rest of his training. Each Jedi Master in the High Council would get 1 full year to train Anakin. Simply, it would allow Anakin to develop into a collaboration of the best of the best. Anakin would get started off at the age of 9 with Jedi Master Yaddle. She was the best fit for Skywalker at his current age. She was older, but not quite Yoda's age. She thrived off of peace, and she would be the first Jedi Master to take Anakin outside the Jedi Temple. Though it wouldn't be anywhere too sketchy, she would take Anakin to the beautiful world of Alderaan. The planet was peaceful, but had a history of darkness. Around 3,000 years before, the Sith invaded the planet and burnt it to the ground. There were still artifacts there, and so Yaddle wanted to take Anakin there to experience the power of the dark side. Not that she wanted him to feel a need to go to it, but she wanted him to know what it was when he felt it, so that he could identify it. On Alderaan, both Yaddle and Anakin would work dedicatedly on harmony and within the focus of the Force. The two of them got along really well, and without Dooku's betrayal, she would be the perfect fit for Anakin's first teacher in the ways of the Force. Halfway through the year, she would begin to pick up on the basic lightsaber instruction he had received before they left on their journey. The reason she waited so long is that she wanted him to be fresh at it, so she could see how well he would do without wielding a lightsaber in nearly half a year. Truthfully, a style of teaching that Yaddle gave Anakin worked really well for him. After a full year on Alderaan, Anakin would return and be able to spend time with his best friend Barriss before being taken under the wing of Jedi Master Adi Gallia. Gallia had different goals for Anakin. She was born on Corellia, and she believed that Anakin needed experience on city worlds of the core, because Anakin never left the temple until he got his crystal from Ilum and his full year on Alderaan. Adi Gallia would focus on the charisma needed from a Jedi. While Anakin during his year with her would only change from 10 to 11, she believed it would be very important for him to learn charisma. Adi Gallia was a very powerful Jedi, and she was renowned for her charisma across the galaxy. Anakin took a liking to Gallia. She was kind, sweet, and she reminded Anakin a lot of a younger Yaddle. Adi Gallia had a closer bond with Anakin, but her schedule was much stricter than Yaddle's. Anakin and Adi worked hard hours every day without stopping. Anakin was able to keep pace with her, though. It made him incredibly fit, and by the time he was passed on to Even Peel, Anakin was ready for what Master Peel would put him through. Master Peel was another older member of the Jedi Order. Master Peel was a terrific duelist, and he would run Anakin through the gauntlet. While a full year of consistent lightsaber combat would keep Anakin grounded inside the temple, he would excel because of it. After a year with Even Peel, he'd be passed on to Master Yarael Poof, who would take Anakin across the galaxy. Throughout the year, he would show Anakin planets in the Outer Rim. Yarael believed it would be beneficial to Anakin's training to know the planets of the less fortunate. As the Jedi's chosen one, it would be his responsibility at some point in his life to take care of these people. He'd be responsible for leading the Jedi into a new era, and Yarael showed him everything he could make sure that Skywalker would be ready for in the galaxy. Anakin would enjoy his time with Master Poof because he'd be able to see so much that he knew and read about over the years, but now with his own eyes he could see it. The galaxy was wondrous, and it was a beautiful place. When Anakin was moved on to Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, everything would slow down drastically. Mundi was a different type of Jedi. While yes, Anakin was a Jedi with the code and had the core values of a Jedi, Ki-Adi-Mundi was very cold. Mundi had no natural feelings that most Jedi had, and it was very obvious. But Mundi would have Skywalker focus on his connection with the Force. But much like Even Peel, he'd be stuck within the Jedi Temple. It didn't bother Anakin. He enjoyed Temple life, though his best friend Barriss had become a Padawan at this point, and she was currently serving with Luminara Unduli. The next couple years would be rather bland with Opa Rancis, Eth Koth, and Saesee Tin. Nothing wrong with the way they taught, just they didn't have as enhancing lessons as Yaddle, Yarael, and of course Adi Gallia. It would be alright because Anakin's next teacher would be a combination of Mace Windu and Sifo Dyas. As Anakin came into his own maturity, the two Jedi would have Anakin focus on his physical attributes. Hitting the Jedi gym was very important in Windu's eyes, and Sifo Dyas was all on board with it. Because both masters were extremely gifted in their physical strength and attributes, they would teach Anakin how to use those same attributes. Windu would also teach Anakin how to use Vapad, which would be very difficult because Anakin had no natural connection with the dark side. But using Vapad would come as powerful as a tool to Skywalker if he ever confronted a Sith. Sifo Dyas was great to Skywalker as well, and their bond continued since he was a youngling. When the time came with those two were over and done with, Anakin was passed on to Depa Billaba, Mace Windu's former student. Billaba would take Skywalker to a multitude of worlds that formerly belonged to the Jedi, Tython, Jedha, Ahch-To, and the multitude of others, so that Anakin can learn more. She did this because instead of doing what she wanted, she asked the teenage Anakin Skywalker what he would like to learn, and this was it. Anakin wanted to visit the history of the Jedi. It would provide him new pride for his journey and new pride for the Jedi itself. Depa and Anakin's bond also tied in a lot because of their time together. And then Anakin would be passed on to the last two teachers being Yoda and Plo Koon. This would be for Anakin's trials. He'd be getting ready to pass his trials into becoming a Jedi Knight, even at such a young age. Plo and Yoda would make Anakin work harder than he ever worked before. Anakin's only job was to be the best he could. Anakin would learn from the best duelists in the galaxy, and he would become incredible with his lightsaber. But they also focused on his path with the Force. Anakin spent time with not just two masters he was meant to spend time with, but with the rest of the council during this extended year. When the time came for Anakin to pass his trials, he was nearly centuries ahead of his own path. There wasn't anyone other than a few council members who trained him that were able to be more advanced than him. Anakin excelled in becoming a Jedi Knight. When he became a Knight, he was gifted a robe from the council. It was a white and gold robe that resembled what the Jedi wore during the High Republic. They believed Anakin would be the one to lead the Jedi back into a new era of High Republic and High Jedi. But after some time, there was no noticeable change. Though Anakin's new robes were attracting the attention from others around the Order, people saw him with glimmering hope in their eyes. People would follow Anakin's wardrobe style. Though they would wear the lighter robes, they would not don the golden rims of the robes that Skywalker wore. As the years slowly passed by, Anakin would be out in the Outer Rim, doing relief work with Jedi Master Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn. During this time, they would spend time on worlds like Ryloth and Tatooine. Though during this time, in the Outer Rim, Skywalker would feel the presence of the dark side, and he would track it down, following it to the dune seas of Tatooine. Anakin walked along the sands after getting off Viziopi. Anakin had no disdain for sand, as he treaded along it, delicately, hardly leaving footprints behind. Skywalker stopped and closed his eyes and knelt to the ground in the middle of the desert. He opened his heart to the Force, and he could see everything around him, without even opening his eyes. To the east, there was a powerful crate dragon ripping apart a group of Tusken raiders. To the northwest, there was a group of Jawas scavenging a crashed vessel, and then to the south, there it was. The darkness. He could hear the voices. One was a powerful male Zabrak, and the other was a powerful female Twi'lek. Anakin stood up and started walking in the direction. He was a younger man at this point, only 22, and yet leagues more powerful than even Yoda himself. When he got to the rock formations outside the Dune Sea, he could hear the voices with his own ears, rather than the Force. Anakin would stop where he was, and the voices would silence themselves. Rocks began to tumble to the ground from the left to the right. Skywalker stood silently, still, waiting. When they came around, he didn't move. From the sky came down the Master, Darth Maul, and from the ground came the student, Darth Talon. Both ignited their weapons and swung for Skywalker. He shifted himself around ever so slightly, using the Force to throw Talon's strike into the sand. Anakin ducked under a strike made by Maul before igniting his own lightsaber. Anakin didn't hesitate. He locked blades with Talon. She was very powerful as a duelist, a brute by every means. She shoved as hard as she could, pushing him forward, and Anakin fell back to the side. Though Anakin allowed her to do so, Skywalker used her leverage against her, before throwing his elbow backwards, clipping her in the jaw, and in the same movement twirling his lightsaber around as he clashed with Maul, cutting his lightsaber into two pieces. Anakin used the Force and lifted both Talon and Maul up into the air, and pushed them into the sides of the walls. Anakin sheathed his lightsaber and picked up both halves of Maul's lightsaber, throwing half at Maul and keeping the other half for himself. Talon ran at Skywalker as he sidestepped and used the Force to throw her jabbing blade to the side. She was unable to stop Anakin from controlling her like a puppet. Maul came in trying to assist his student, and it proved to no avail, as Anakin did the same to Maul, tossing him around like a puppet, using the Force to throw him off balance. Truthfully, Anakin wasn't playing with his food. He was just having a duel with them, and they were both powerful adversaries. Both of them were older than him. Skywalker ignited the other half of Maul's blade and blocked a swing made by Maul before twisting his arm around, hearing a snapping sound. Maul screamed in pain before Talon was thrown into Maul, pushing them off of their feet. Maul threw his apprentice to the side as he rose and swung at Anakin, missing blatantly, as Anakin drew Maul's blade and drove it into the Sith Lord. Talon saw her master's death, and she was enraged, getting up, swinging violently at Skywalker, watching each swing miss blatantly. It was genuinely offensive, the disrespect Anakin put on their names, before he spun around and used the Force to throw her as hard as he could, shattering all of her bones and organs simultaneously, killing her in an instant. Anakin made sure it was as painless as possible, and for Talon, it would be. One moment she was alive, and the next she wasn't. Anakin picked up his hologram, and while dropping Maul's lightsaber to the ground, he contacted the Jedi Council and informed them of the deaths of the two remaining Sith. The Council would be pleased that Anakin had finally done what they considered bringing balance to the Force, before they requested that he come back to the Jedi Temple. They had a gift for him. Anakin nodded and ended the call. Inside the council chambers, Plo looked over at Mace and nodded his head. It made Mace remember what Plo said before inside the Naboo hangar bay when Maul tried to escape. When Anakin eventually returned, he would be gifted a student by the name of Ahsoka Tano, and Anakin would take her in with open arms. While she was a bit of a hothead, he got around to her and worked on getting her to be more like a Jedi. Anakin would do what the Council envisioned, and what he hoped to do himself. Skywalker would lead the Jedi to a popularity not seen since the era of the High Republic. The Jedi would be on the front lines of freedom, and the restoration of peace in the galaxy, the planets that needed it. Without Palpatine, the galaxy would avoid war and find great peace, even with other chancellors. with Skywalker having been treated as one of the Jedi, he would bring balance to the Force, the Jedi way, and the galaxy would find happiness from it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Apollo, Mad Minute Studios, Anakin003, and Flynn Van Cease for supporting the channel. Hit the like this video so we can see what comes next. I don't know what it is, but it is. If you want to see a what if, let me know below. I read all accounts, but under crossovers. Check out the Twitch, community, Discord, and Patreon. Support me in other ways. For the free lightsaber, go down below. Hit that subscribe button first of all. Go to the doc on the pinned comment. Write your name on the doc. We're giving away 3 lightsabers at 50,000 subscribers. We're almost there, and I'm moving away in like 2 weeks. So let's come on. Let's do it. Come on, let's do it. I move away on the 23rd. Okay, that's my move-in day. So let's hit the subscribers before I move away. Can we do that? Let's hit the 50,000 so I can give those lightsabers before I move away. Otherwise, go check out those channels that showed up earlier, and let's talk about our story. So let me just address this before the comments come in, and for all the people that already left the comments, well, you missed the point. This is not what if Anakin brought balance to the Force. This is what if Anakin was raised as a Jedi. Okay, and I feel like a broken record because I say this almost every video, but not every video is meant to follow the prophecy of the chosen one. It's boring. If I did 154 videos about following the prophecy of the chosen one, I would probably hate my life, to be honest. It's just so this isn't me following the prophecy of the chosen one. Not every video has to follow that borderline. It's not every video is meant to be the prophecy of the chosen one, and this is obviously one of those videos that's not supposed to be a prophecy of the chosen one. It's a story about Anakin being trained as a Jedi, growing up as a Jedi, and you know, it kind of has a similar ring to the Anakin having reaching his full potential video that I did a little while ago. But the truth is I always want to make sure that each story is unique in its own respect, and I feel like I was able to accomplish that with this story. There were some things that reminded me of the Anakin having a twin sister in this, but truthfully, other than like a little bit of similarity, I think this one sat out relatively differently. One thing I want to talk about immediately is the difference between Dooku and Palpatine. That's something that I know is going to turn a lot of people off, and the reason is I wanted it to be a different villain. I don't want to be the same villain all the time, and having a different villain makes the story more interesting. Having him fight Maul on Tatooine of all places is kind of just different. It's something unique, and ironically, I didn't even think about it till now, it's the same place that Maul died in canon. But I wasn't trying to do poetry, because, you know, it's like poetry and it rhymes. That just happens to be a coincidence. But truthfully, I wanted the main villain to be different, and having Sidious as a main villain would be kind of bland and kind of expected. So I decided to be like, what if Dooku? So I kind of did a 2-part what if in this. Is like, what if Dooku just like set up Palpatine? What if he was like betraying Palpatine, and kind of just was like, oh yeah, actually I'm still a Jedi and I don't really care about the Sith. But I got you, and that's kind of what I wanted to play off a little bit here. Again, I want to keep making unique stories. I want all the stories to be unique, which is probably why the story is like 40 minutes long. So I always strive to keep doing something unique so that when you come into a story, you don't know what to expect. You don't expect the same thing. You don't expect Anakin to be winning all the time. Like, Anakin's not going to break the galaxy or XYZ. I know some stories are kind of given that Anakin's going to win, but I always want you to be like, oh, I didn't see that coming, or be on the edge of your seat. So I hope I was able to accomplish that with yet another video. Thank you for all the support on the Earth series. I'm going to continue that, by the way. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.